Good afternoon. I am thrilled to be here to welcome you. My name is Amanda Lewis, and I'm here welcoming you in my role as the director of the Institute for Research on Race and Public Policy. Yes, that's right. Yes, thank you. I'm going to take care of a couple of housekeeping items, and I'm talking really slow to try to give Phil a chance. He's somewhere nearby walking up. You'll have a chance to talk to him later. But Shawn's here at least. So a couple things. IRRPP is audio and video recording the event. If folks aren't able to be here and want to watch it, we will make it available a couple of weeks after the event on our website. We also have ASL interpreters and a cart provided at the front of the room on the this side, which is, sorry, somebody's texting me. And there will be a Q&A at the end of the talk. Please hold your questions until the end of the lecture, and we would also love for as many of you who can to stay around afterwards. We'll have a reception in the back, and there will be, some of you already gotten books, but we'll have some time, Dr. Ginwright will have some time to sign books at the end. I want to offer a huge thanks to the IRRPP staff. Can you wave? Dina's here, Cindy and Stephanie's in the back. They work incredibly hard every day to make stuff like this happen, but we're also available if you need anything at any time, let us know. And also a quick reminder that registration is quickly filling up for our summer workshop for educators on advancing racial justice in schools. It's a program we're very proud of. We organized it, developed it in partnership with our dear friend Keisha Hobbs, who's sitting right there, and we have Matt Rodriguez. All kinds of great people who are involved are here, so please join us. There are postcards when you first come in. But I'd like to start by welcoming Provost Colley up to say a few words. She has been serving as the acting provost and vice chancellor for academic affairs since June 2022. This is her second time very generously serving in this capacity. She has also served as the dean of the graduate school since 2012 and has focused her efforts on supporting historically underserved and underrepresented students during their transition into graduate school and beyond. By trade, she is a professor of biochemistry and molecular genetics, and she's been recognized as a University of Illinois University Scholar, which is the highest designation for a faculty member within the University of Illinois system. So please join me in welcoming her.
Well, thank you so much, Amanda. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to join you here today for this year's annual Philip J. Bowman Lecture. And I hear he's coming in, I hope, pretty soon. On behalf of UIC leadership and the whole UIC community, I want to thank everyone for joining us here today for this very special lecture. I would also like to express our most sincere thanks to Dr. Shawn Ginwright for generously sharing his time and expertise with us this afternoon. And as I told him earlier, I'm very excited to hear his talk today. I was hoping to recognize Dr. Bowman, the namesake of this lecture series, honoring his monumental contributions to UIC as the inaugural director or founding director of the IRRPP. And I'm sure we'll see him pretty soon. He's coming to us from University of Michigan, where he currently serves as a professor in the School of Education and as a faculty associate in the Institute for Social Research. Also here today are his children, Jamila, Dubois, and Phil. Okay, yay, right here, right in front. And there are some other sort of UIC VIPs in the audience. We have our Dean of CUPA, the College of Urban Planning and Public Administration, Stacy White, our Dean of the College of Education, Catherine Cheval, right next to her, and our Director of the Great Cities Institute, Teresa Cordova. I'm sure there's many more VIPs from UIC. I'm just not picking them up right now, okay? Before I hand things back over to Dr. Lewis, I want to talk a bit about the significance of today's lecture and this series. Oh, I think Our namesake is walking in the door right now. Yay! Okay, now we got the big guy here. Okay, hi. Okay, so as most of you know, or many of you know, UIC is home to 16 distinct colleges, and each of which are dedicated to advancement of knowledge in the service of Chicago's communities, the nation, and the world. And we share a common mission to create knowledge that transforms our views of the world, and also to provide a wide range of students with educational opportunity that only a leading research university can offer. And it is a direct result of our urban mission that issues of race, social justice, and public policy are amongst our highest priorities, not only because of where we are in Chicago, but because of the communities which contribute to and shape our identity as an institution. So I don't think it comes as any surprise that the Institute for Research on Race and Public Policy was first established 20 years ago. Over 20 years ago, right? How many years ago, Amanda? 24? Yeah, or I should ask Dr. Bowman, not Amanda. About 24? To address issues of representation of people of color across the university and to increase society's understanding of the root causes of racial and ethnic inequality through research-based solutions. And since then, the IRRPP has served our campus, city, and country as a hub of intellectual inquiry, community building, strategic thinking, and radical new ideas with the potential to shift our societal paradigms. Most recently, IRRPP has published a series of reports on the current state of racial justice in Chicago, and these have explored the conditions and experiences of various groups in the metropolitan region and have been taken up widely by community organizations, elected officials, foundations, and community organizers as key resources for developing new research projects and innovative policy solutions. So I personally want to direct you to their most recent report, Beyond Erasure and Profiling, Cultivating Strong and Vibrant Arab American Communities in Chicagoland, that recently came out, and you can find this on their website along with all their other reports. So I'll close my time with you today by challenging each one of you to take the words of today's featured speaker to heart and to learn how to tap into the change-making potential within you. I also challenge you to use today as an opportunity to forge lasting connections and meaningful connections. And it's through these connections and collaborative relationships that we'll be able to fulfill our missions of social justice and transforming the world. And now I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much. So this is one of my favorite things we do, this series, this lecture, in large part because it's named for Philip J. Bowman. The lecture focuses on providing timely analysis of race, equity, and justice questions. And it's really named in Phil's honor because of his prolific record as a scholar and an educator. I am lucky enough, I realized, I hate to say this, I think I've known you almost 30 years now. Phil, for those of you who know him and those of you who are meeting him today, is the ultimate intellectual and scholar. He's deeply curious, he's sincerely interested in the world, in people's stories, and in understanding why things are the way they are and what we could do to transform them. He has an extremely long legacy of both generous and gracious mentoring of dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of scholars over his years in the academy, including myself and many others in this room. I see some nods in the back from Mosi. For those of us who know Dr. Bowman, it's not a surprise that he's spending this part of his career as a professor of higher education. He understands the nuances of these institutions better than almost anyone I've known. It's probably a tribute to the fact that he understands the nuances of institutional power as it intersects with psychology better than most. But we all owe Phil a great debt of gratitude. The fact that IRRPP exists in the way it does today is a tribute to him. As the first permanent director of the Institute, he navigated the complex political intricacies of securing permanent status with the Illinois Board of Higher Education, and I know that all sounds very boring, but it was really complicated, and I'm not sure anybody else could have done it. He also held people's feet to the fire to do what they said they were going to do, and created a really strong foundation that subsequent directors, including Beth Ritchie, Constance Dallas, Kevin Kumashiro, and others, including myself, could build on. And we always work to continue his legacy and live up to his example. And I'm really deeply grateful to him, as is the entire IRRPP community. In many ways, when we think about who to invite for the Bowman Lecture, we always try to invite speakers who work in the tradition of Dr. Bowman. Smart, nuanced, but also leading with values, and insisting on the full humanity of those who we study, who we serve, who we work with, who we collaborate with. And all of that is certainly true of our speaker today, Dr. Shawn Ginwright. For those of you who don't know, as the Provost was saying, we've been working on these reports for the last 7 years, writing about the state of racial justice in Chicago. And as part of this work, we've been spending a lot of time lately thinking about young people, how we as a city do or don't meet their needs, how much in recent years they have been blamed not only for their own challenges, but been labeled as the source of the problem for the wider city. And if you've watched any coverage over the last few weeks of Chicago, you'll know that's true. And in this work, we've been asking of ourselves and of all of our colleagues and partners in community organizations, in foundations, and in public roles, what would Chicago look like if we centered young people's needs in all of our decision-making, in all of our funding priorities, in all of our policy sensibilities? What would it mean to really love and care for Chicago youth? We're pondering these questions in partnership with a wide range of amazing organizations, some of whom are with us today, including the Chicago Freedom School folks, the Praxis Institute. Yes, absolutely, snaps. I always look silly when I do that, but I'll do it anyway. It Takes a Village, Family of Schools, Brighton Park Neighborhood Council, Facing History Ourselves. These are just some of the many organizations doing really important work in the city. And as I've had these conversations, we have engaged with the work of a range of scholars, but Dr. Shawn Ginwright has often been a North Star of sorts. He's a leader in the field of critical youth studies, not work that is critical of youth, but work that offers the kind of critical perspective on the world that is generative and that challenges us to do better. I'm going to keep my introduction of him on the short side, as I'm sure you'd rather hear from him than about him. But I will say a few things. He's professor of education in the Africana Studies Department, and I'm allowed to say what you're doing next? Sure. Okay. And a senior researcher at San Francisco State, where he's been for a long time, but he just let me know he's moving to the College of Education at Harvard starting in the fall. So he's going to make a big coastal shift. His research examines the ways in which youth in urban communities navigate the constraints of poverty and struggle to create equality and justice in their schools and in their communities. He's the author of an amazing new book, which he'll be talking about today, which we have for sale, and which he'll be signing later. He's the founder and chief executive officer of Flourish Agenda, a research lab and consulting firm whose mission it is to design strategies that unlock the power of healing and engage youth of color and adult allies in transforming their schools and communities. He's been a leader in a wide range of work to champion equity and hope in schools and beyond, and please join me in welcoming him here today.
I'm humbled for this invitation and to be able to speak to you and talk to you about some of the most critical issues that I think are facing our communities, that are facing our families, and are facing ourselves. So thank you for this opportunity. I have a lot to say, and so I want to make sure that I actually don't rush through my conversation with you today. So I want to talk about a couple of things. I want to talk about some of the issues that I think we are facing in our movements for justice and our movements to transform our communities. I also want to talk a little bit about what the consequences of our work is for our own well-being in our communities, and then provide you with and talk about the book, The Four Pivots, which is really about the kinds of changes we need to make as individuals, the kinds of changes we need to make in our relationships with others, and the kinds of changes we need to make as institutions. And that my vision is that by practicing these simple four pivots, that we can actually begin to usher on the transformative, deep and profound change for justice that we all seek. That's a lot to say, but I want to try. That is a high goal, but I want to try to get through that. I want to also start by just saying that the context that we're in right now. I wrote the book. Some people sort of ask me, why did I write this book? I wrote the book for a number of reasons. One, I wrote it for me because as a community organizer, as a professor, as a researcher, as a CEO, as a board chair of an organization, all the leadership positions that I've occupied and continue to occupy, one of the things that I didn't get is the kinds of sensibilities and supports I needed to address my own stress, my own sense of hope in really difficult, challenging situations like we're in. And so much of this book is really a reflection on some of my deepest failures, places where I just really messed up, but there's lessons in that. And also, you know, I've worked in Oakland and the San Francisco Bay Area for 25 years. And y'all, I have seen really good, great organizations crumble from inside fighting. I've watched communities who are committed, deeply committed to the same justice that we're all trying to achieve, turn on each other. I have seen the consequences of the nonprofit industrial complex and the stress and the burnout that it requires, to engage in change. And so part of this book is an antidote, I hope, to the toxicity of oppression, and is a salve or a medicine for the poison of inequality, and that gives us some fuel to have a different, profound shift in who we are to achieve the profound social justice goals that we seek. I am not convinced at this stage of my career that the answers to the changes that we're making are only sort of structural, technical kinds of policy questions and strategies. I think that's deeply important. But there's another part of the game, right, that I think we miss, and that is who we are. And this is a spiritual journey more than a technical one. And I want to talk tonight about ways that I think we can deeply engage and change and root ourselves in a deeper sense of humanity that gives us the kind of fuel and vision that we need to move forward. We are in a difficult time, y'all, and let me stick to the script because I could just start talking. Let me. I'm just riffing, y'all. I gotta go. It says go to point 2 now, so I gotta stay focused. Say what? So I feel like I'm with family, so I'm gonna just talk too, right? Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna just talk. So I do want to start with a story, though, and it's a deeply personal story. And I think it sets the context for the time that we're in right now. And it's a story about my mama. My mama grew up in a small town in Florida called Trenton, and it's right next to Gainesville. I grew up in LA, outside of Los Angeles. And in the summers, me and my brothers, I have 2 brothers, we would be playing around in the streets. You know, my mom would say, y'all bring your butts home when the street lights come on. And y'all remember that? Yeah. And when we would come back, my mother would tell us stories about her own childhood, about her growing up in Trenton, Florida. And I remember as a child, she would share stories about, you know, her climbing a mango tree in her backyard. And she would tell these stories to me and my brothers about these bugs that in the evening they would glow and they would be like fire. And as a child, we were so enchanted with my mother telling stories about this place that she grew up in. And she told us about this magical little house that she grew up in that had trees and a creek behind it. And so she would tell those stories every day, and it just the most fond memories. And I've always, as an adult, really wanted to see that home that my mother had always shared with us. Probably about 8 years ago, my uncle passed away, and my mother went back to Trenton to his funeral. And she wanted me to come to the funeral. You haven't met my side of the family, child. You need to come on. And I'm like, Mom, I got some papers to grade. I got graduate students. I don't have time. You know, I'll send flowers. And you know how mamas are. She said, get your butt on a plane and come to Trenton. So I did what my mama asked. And when I got there, you know, she was so proud. You know, she was introducing, this is my son, the doctor, and she was going to each of my cousins' house. And we would sit on the couch covered with plastic, right, and sip lemonade, right? And, you know, deep down inside, I'm like, I really want to see the house, Mom, that you used to share with us. And so towards the end of the day, I said, Mom, it's getting hot. Can we go see the house? And she said, come on, baby, let me show you the house. So we walked down the street, and then we took a left turn onto a dirt road. And I'm not sure if you've ever been to the South before, but there's these trees that canopy the roads, and there's beautiful moss that hangs from these trees. So my mother and I walked in silence down this dirt road, and it was getting later in the afternoon, and sure enough, I could see on the side of the road these hovering little fireflies. They were glowing, and I got all excited, right? And she said that's where the mango tree was, and she showed me where the mango tree was, and I said, Mom, where's the house? And so she said, we're here. And so when I turned and looked at the house, I almost cried, because this is what I saw. It actually wasn't a house, it was a shack. And it was for the first time in my life, I didn't know that my mother had grown up with such poverty. She used to describe this as a magical, enchanting house. And she could see that I was overwhelmed by what I was seeing. This is not a house, this is a shack. This is not what you shared with me, Mama. But she saw something entirely different, y'all. She took my hand like, you know, she was a child at Disneyland, and she took me into the house with the squeaky floors, and she looked at this, she pointed out the floor, and she said, see, son, this is where we used to keep the number 10 tub. Now, just like y'all, I didn't know what the hell a number 10 tub was. And she said, this is a number 10 tub. Well, Mama, what's a number 10 tub? It's a big metal tub where they used to take baths because there wasn't running water. And then she showed me where the stove was, and where the heat used to come from, where I used to cook. And, you know, she took me to every nook and cranny of that little one-room house, man, with such joy. And she could see that I was like, you know, emotional. I was crying, right? And so she saw that in me, and she stopped me. And she said, boy, what's wrong with you? What's going on? I said, Mom, I didn't know you grew up with such poverty, Mama. You never shared that with me. And she said something to me that I'll never forget. She took my hand and she said, son, don't be sad, because I want you to know that in this house, this is where I dreamed of you before you even existed. And for you to be able to come here and return to the place of my dreams is a fulfillment of my life. So don't be sad. This is actually a day of rejoicing. And it shifted me. And when I left that house and began to reflect on the plane of what my mother had shared with me, I realized that my mama understood oppression and poverty but was not defined by it. And that she was able to cultivate a sense of imagination that was so profound that she envisioned me before I even existed. What type of imagination, what type of dreaming, what type of ability to see beyond the present condition does that take? And so I share that with you because I also believe that lesson from my mama to understand oppression but not be defined by it, is a lesson for us. For those of us who search and toil and work tirelessly for justice, that we also have to take up the mantle and the lesson of my mama, which is we understand these issues, but we refuse to be defined by them. And so in many ways, the book, The Four Pivots, gives us a tool, a way for us to begin to grapple with both the conditions that we find ourselves in, not as social justice advocates, not as teachers, not as professors and researchers, but as human beings that are trying to make this place better than it was than when we got here. And so we all know that, that we have been working and engaging in justice work. I know from my own work in San Francisco and in Oakland, I've dedicated my entire life to to try to transform the conditions of Black youth in schools, in communities, in juvenile probation departments. And one of the things that I've learned is that the systems, we all know that the systems and institutions don't love our babies. I got that, right? But there became a point in my own life and career that I recognized that it is not just the policy changes that matter most in these systems, that it's the people. And that there's something fundamental that is required as human beings to actually make the policies actually have the kind of impact. We know all too well about the issues that are happening in our schools and communities in the country right now. Research report that was done by the Surgeon General's office recognized that we're in a youth mental health crisis, right? And that the expanding mental health need of young people, primarily Black and brown, far outweigh the mental health availability in our cities and neighborhoods. And it doesn't stop there. That the toxic environments that we work, live, and play in, and I call that toxic in the spirit and the research by James Gabarino, who called it socially toxic environments. These environments where we work, live, and play that are toxic because of fear, that are toxic because of lack, that are toxic because of shame, right? These are the types of toxicity that exist in our environments that are invisible but have a impact on all of our well-being. That toxicity has an impact on not just young people but us as well. I am tired, y'all. Don't get emotional, brother. But I am tired, man, of accepting children being shot in a school. How do we get there, man? Right? How do we get to that we shake our head and go, oh no, not again, right? How do we get to the ongoing racialized trauma of Black and brown children who are being shot in our neighborhoods and kind of shake our heads again like, oh no, not again? This research suggests that as this happens more frequently, we become numb to it. That we lose our sense of outrage and moral and ethical power. And so that is my fear, right? That this environment that we're in begins to force us to come up with the right solutions to the wrong damn problems, right? The right solutions to the wrong damn problems. And what do I mean by that? It means that we continue to address the issues that are at the surface, but are not at the root. And I'm not only talking about structural and racial inequality, right? What I'm talking about are the consequences, the psycho-spiritual damage that has been unleashed on Black and brown communities because of our exposure to these issues. And so just providing access sometimes ain't enough. I had more time, y'all, I can go over example after example after example of when we've created opportunity, but the damage has been done. It's almost as if, like, let's just think about your house right now, okay, where you live. If there was let's say a factory in your house, or next to your house right now, that for years it was spewing poison in your neighborhood, and you notice that people are getting sick because of this factory, and so you organized your neighborhood to close that factory down, right? And you feel good, we need to close that factory down. What hasn't happened is you haven't addressed the exposure for that neighborhood over that years of exposure to that toxicity. Okay. So this is what I'm trying to convey. This is the issue that I'm trying people to understand. That while the structures are important to address, the exposure that we all have had as a result of that exposure sometimes gets unaddressed, y'all. Now, as a result, I'm gonna get a little technical on y'all. This is how I see it. This is a systems transformative change. This is not my model. And in fact, this is supposed to be an iceberg, but I am not a damn artist. And a triangle is easier to draw than an iceberg. This research comes from Otto Schweimer and other folks that have done and thinking about transformative change. And so, again, the question is, like, how are we coming up with the right solutions to the wrong problems? Well, this model says that most of what we do is above the iceberg. There is an event, we ask what happens, and we react to it. And this is the cycle that we're in, unfortunately, that we see with gun violence in our schools and neighborhoods, that there's an event and we react to it. Underneath that, if you go underneath the iceberg, then we can ask different questions about, well, what is the trend over time? And therefore, we can at least anticipate what's happening. But we can go deeper, and then we can ask ourselves what influenced that pattern over time, and then we could redesign the pattern. But that's still not the answer, because if we go at the very, very root of the issue, we ask questions about our assumptions, our values, our beliefs. What are those that people hold? And if we could shift and change those, then we can transform, right? If we transform, we could redesign. If we redesign, then we can re-anticipate, and then we can react. So this is the work that I'm dedicated my career and life to, which is transformation. A lot of people use the term transformation. But what I mean by transformation is a fundamental shift in how we define the problem and how we react to it. And so the book, The Four Pivots, then provides us with an ethical and moral compass. It's an ethical and moral compass about the changes that we need to make as leaders, the changes that we need to make as social justice advocates, the changes that we need to make for those who organize communities. And the reason I call it, when I was thinking about, working on the book, it was gonna be change for a better society or something like that, right? And my wife she's always right on target, right? She said that, if you think about a change is hard. A change takes a lot of work. And so she said a pivot is something subtle, right? That if you just change your direction just a little bit, if you change just a little bit, it takes very little energy, but you end up in a different direction. Where a change, you gotta stop what you're doing and do something else. Y'all feel me? A pivot means that you're making a subtle change in what you're already doing, and consistent shift in that pivot will place you in an entirely different direction. If you think about what we used to do in the 1960s, is we used to just put our trash in one thing, right? Trash. And then there was an environmentalist movement that said, well, you know what? If everybody just made a pivot to separating recycle from trash, it will have a profound impact on our environment. And now we take that little subtle pivot for granted. And that little pivot has a significant impact on our environment. Well, these pivots, small and subtle, have a profound impact on our capacity to engage in the deep change that I'm talking about. What are those pivots? The first pivot I call a pivot from a lens to a mirror. A pivot from a lens to a mirror. Now, what does that mean? I was trained as a sociologist who studied education and race. And as I was trained as a sociologist, I was largely trained to have a lens on how to diagnose and see the issues that are facing Black and brown young people. That is, I could talk about school suspensions, I could talk about structural inequality, I could talk about racist policies and practices and lack of funding and all of those issues. That's how I was trained. I was given a really good lens to understand the world. I was given a really good lens to diagnose issues. What I didn't get was a mirror, which is the deeper reflection about who I am in this work. What I didn't get is, what do I say to that young boy, that young student that came to me that said that they saw somebody get shot and they're afraid? I didn't get the mirror work. I got the lens work, but I didn't have the tool to deeply engage my own questioning about who I am as a human being and how I feel. It was like irrelevant, just do the damn work. But I realized that that's insufficient, y'all. That the mirror work allows us to heal. And as a result of that, sometimes, y'all, you gotta give me some time today. Sometimes what we do in this work is we hide behind lens work because the mirror work is too damn hard. Because the mirror work says, oh, you want me to ask questions about the relationship I had with my mama? You want me to heal the relationship that I have with my daddy? It means that I gotta engage in that relationship that you hear me? Right? Lens work is easier work because it implicates the other. But mirror work forces you to turn inward and ask yourself questions about, why don't I trust you and why did I say that? Right? In our movements for justice, y'all, in our movements for justice, this is one pivot that has profound impact on our own long-term sustainability. And if I had more time, I could talk about cancel culture and call-out culture and all of those issues, right? And I talk about that in the book. We need accountability culture. We need that. We need to have accountability. But there's also a place of grace, and we don't have to oftentimes have we haven't learned to dance between accountability and grace, right? We have learned to lean into accountability, right? And hold people accountable, but we haven't learned the beautiful dance with grace. Or sometimes we've learned the beautiful dancing of grace, but we haven't learned how to engage in accountability. And the dance between them requires mirror work. And mirror work is about asking questions about the things that have harmed us. If I had more time, y'all, I would talk about trigger culture, but I'm gonna talk about it anyway. I don't care. Y'all asked me to speak. All right, so I'm gonna just talk about it, man. Part of my work, all my work is about healing. And even my graduate students that are in my classes, they know my work is about healing. And we talk about healing and we talk about trauma, right? And oftentimes there's something that comes up in class that the students kind of say, Dr. Ginwright, that's triggering. Or a student might say something that's triggering. What that means is, you shouldn't trigger me, so don't do that again. And I say, no, you have it all mixed up. Your trigger is the result of unhealed trauma. That's your work to do. Because if we walk around wounded, how are we supposed to create healing? So what we need to do, So when we talk about triggers, we have to put it in the context that we've been wounded, but the responsibility to not be triggered is your own mirror work. It's your own healing, right? But this is how most of us see mirror work. I saw that on Instagram somewhere. I know the image. Charles, I know the image ain't good, man. But I couldn't resist. This is how most of us see mirror work, right? How am I supposed to heal, right? If everybody else is toxic? How am I supposed to heal if I live is this in a toxic culture? Or that's not my response. You understand this, right? And this has become part and parcel of our work for justice. And that our organizations don't oftentimes have the tools for mirror work. In my own organization, we start, tell me if I'm going to all right, okay. In my own organization, just a practice that we use before we jump into any agenda, we start with just an emotional check-in. Just simple, right? Just how you feeling. Why do we do that? We do that because we know that how you are showing up at this particular meeting is going to show up. But at least if I knew you was having a bad day, at least if I knew that you were still trying to work through this argument you just had with your wife or whatever, at least if I knew that, then that gives me a sense of compassion, and that allows me to dance between accountability and grace. So this mirror work are a set of practices, and they're really a set of questions, really, right? They're really a set of questions. In the book, Ben McBride, Pastor Ben McBride, he says that oftentimes in our work for justice, we start with the wrong question. And the wrong question that we oftentimes start with is, what do I need to do? As opposed to, who do I need to become? Ben and I have talked, and he has said that I'm not so sure the current version of ourselves has the capacity to address the issues that we have before us. The current version of ourselves hasn't done mirror work. And so the capacity for us to engage in that work changes us as human beings. And when we change as human beings, we act different and we show up different. So this mirror work is something that should be part and parcel to our work for justice. The second pivot is the pivot from transactional to transformative relationships. And this pivot suggests that, again, that we work and live in this society that values the transactional and the efficient over the deep and meaningful. And we know, for those of us, anybody who's worked in a school, who's worked in a community organization, that it is not the transactional relationship that made the difference. Everybody in here, well, the notes say, okay, I'm sorry, y'all. See, I just be riffing, man, because I feel like I'm at home. It says define the terms first, so I ain't defining terms. I'm sorry, man. I'm just feeling comfortable. I got to be more formal. This is important. All right. So, Amanda, you get it? Okay. All right. I'll stick. All right. So where was I? Everyone in here knows what a transformative relationship is because we have them in our lives. And you know you have a transformative relationship when you done been through something with somebody. When they sat with you with your snotty nose and crying, or you bared witness to something that was profoundly human with them, y'all. That's a transformative relationship that somehow, some way our institutions have figured out not to value. Does this make sense? Everyone in this room, and anyone else hearing my voice on the recording, when we went through COVID, you had to have a transformative relationship with somebody that got you through it. My dad died of COVID, man. That was my partner, right? It's a transformative relationship. And one of the things he taught me was the relationship is everything, and your family is even more than that. And so this pivot from transactional to transformative relationship is really about allowing and creating the conditions. And I'm not saying that transactional relationships, we need to do away with those, because we wouldn't have organizations that we're in, right? We need to have roles that are defined and positions. That's a part of the societies that we live in. Every society has some form of transactional relationship, but somehow we've devalued the transformative. Now, without all those terms, perceived trust, all that, that's kind of researchy terms. So let me just say it in plain terms. A transformative relationship is when you've created the conditions for someone else's humanity to spill out on you. Right? Where you've created the conditions where someone feels safe enough to be fully human with you. That's a transformative relationship, and engaging in that in our communities and engaging in that in our organization is about healing. Because transactional relationships are so safe because they're in a box. But transformative relationships are messy. Why are they messy? Because we're human beings. And human beings are messy. But when we learn to enjoy the mess, that the messiness is actually grace in the making, right? I witnessed a program in an organization in Richmond, California, take that concept seriously to address gun violence for young men and women who were shooting each other in North Richmond. And North Richmond is a small neighborhood in the San Francisco Bay Area. The community had been experiencing increasing numbers of shootings and homicides by young people. And a friend of mine, Devone Bogan, brilliant brother, we worked in Oakland and Richmond for a long time, had a brilliant idea. He said, I'm gonna go to the city and say, I wanna hire formerly incarcerated men and women to create loving, transformative relationships with young men on the street who carry guns. And so he did that, and they kind of laughed at him. Get out of here, dude. We're not gonna hire, formerly incarcerated people to loving relationships. We're gonna continue to hire police officers. And what they found was that their increasing budgets on hiring police officers did nothing to the reduction of crime in this area in North Richmond. And so the neighborhood, the city didn't have nothing else to do. So they came back to Devone about a year later, and they gave the brothers some resources out of the city. And Devone says, I don't want this to be another nonprofit, because that funding is fickle, right? I want this to be right in the mayor's office. I want this to be part of the city budget, just like park and recreation. And so they did it. And he created the Office of Neighborhood Safety. I'm not gonna read each of these, but I want you to look at bullet 3 and the last bullet. These are the principles that he built this organization, which is these trusting relationships. Transformative relationships can heal people, and the relationship is the intervention, and the intervention is the relationship. He basically is saying that if we could create loving, caring, transformative relationships with young people who carry guns, we have a chance of addressing violence. And so I went to go watch and understand how transformative relationships, how do you use transformative relationships for gun violence? I'm thinking about it for teachers and education. Like, you're talking about changing a whole neighborhood and community. So this is kind of what I saw. And this is an older man that he had hired that was formerly incarcerated. But what they did is they knew that these formerly incarcerated men, they weren't just hiring any formerly incarcerated cats. They was like, the people that they hired, the men and women that they were hiring, they had a genius way of identifying the genealogy and the geography of every young person they came in contact with. And it sounded something like this. Oh man, what's your name? Mark? What's up, Mark? What's your last name? Mark Wilson. Mark Wilson? Your daddy named Brian? Yeah, Brian Wilson. Oh, man, you know I play football with your daddy. You know what? Yeah, man, and I know your mama because I remember when they first got together. And every young person, they're able to identify and map who they are and where they come from. In other words, we know your people. We know where you're from. That kind of relationship is just a starter. Because the second thing that I heard them say in these interactions, and I know this is going to sound corny, but the first thing that they were trained to say three things. They were trained to every relationship that they had in conversation is to say, I love you, I want you to be alive and free, and is there anything I got to do for you? Now, I know that sounds hella corny, right? Like, I love you, right? And these young cats is carrying guns, and this is what they're trained to do. This is Joe, works for the Office of Neighborhood Safety. And he said, well, man, it's not just we say that, but what we do is we'll be like, Mark, man, I heard your little brother just joined Pop Warner football. You said you needed some cleats. I got some cleats in the back of my car. Hey, Cindy, I know you said your mama was trying to go to Costco and buy some food or bread or whatever. I got some groceries in the car. I'm gonna take it over to your house later. In other words, the relationships were also about building a sense of family with them. Like they were like their uncle, like they called him Uncle Joe, right? And the thing about the office is that because these older men understood the neighborhood, they never asked them, now this is sounding weird, but they never asked them like to not carry guns. Now you might think of Office of Violence Prevention would say don't carry guns, but they knew that wasn't authentic, that wasn't real. So they told the young men, every young man that they work with, we know y'all gotta carry a gun, but check it out. If you need to use that thing, come talk to me first. So unfortunately, there was a shooting at a party where some of the young men that were working with them. And the young men that they were working with, they were getting loaded up. They were strapped up. They knew where the guys that shot up the party were. They was hot. They was getting ready to go light up that other party where these young people had shot up. And then one of the dudes said, man, hold up, man. They said, we got to at least call Joe, Uncle Joe. So they actually called Uncle Joe. And Uncle Joe said, hey, man, I know y'all got to go shoot up the party, man, but just slide by my house first and let me just holler at y'all. And so Joe talked to him, and he said, look, I know y'all got to go shoot up this party, but let's go get some pizza first. And for a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old child with a weapon, that might work, right? Now I know it sounds funny, but what I'm saying is that he was able to use that relationship to de-escalate, to understand what's happening with these young people. And if you do that every day, every week, every month, year in and year out, these are the results you get. In 2009, it had 45 homicides, and by 2014, it had dropped to 12, and it has stayed below 12 to this very day. And so these transformative relationships is an example of just that it's not only a violence prevention solution, but what it suggests is that the human relationship can do anything. And that when we create the conditions in our organizations to have and cultivate, strengthen, and promote humane relationships, that those relationships can take us where we need to be in our quest and our journey for justice. The third pivot is a pivot from problem to possibility. And in this one, this pivot is simply saying that, part of the challenge that we have as social justice workers, and I know I'm as guilty as this as anybody, is that I believed at a point in my life that my capacity to name the problem was the same as solving it. I'll say it again, that the more sophisticated ways that I can name the problem was the same as solving that problem. In other words, as Trista Harris talks about in her book, her book is called, oh my God, I'm going blank here. See, this is why I need my notes. It'll come to me in a second. She calls it problem loving, right? Where we've developed and cultivated this notion that we feel good about our ability to name the problem, that so much so that we believe that naming the problem is as good as solving it. In my own work with graduate students, I recognize this trend that my graduate students really define their own work in terms of sort of naming the problem, and they couldn't see outside of the problem. And one of the things I always tell my students is that, you know, the greatest casualty of oppression is not blocked opportunities. It is not even inequality. But the greatest casualty of oppression is the destruction of our ability to dream beyond it. And as a result of that, listen to me now, as a result of that, because we cannot dream or see beyond the condition like my mama did, what we tend to do is our most courageous act to do is to reduce the misery that we don't want. I'll say it again, right? What we tend to do is focus on misery reduction as opposed to creating the thing that we want. And this is why we have a way with words. You can see this in the words that we use to enshrine our work, right? So, for example, the term violence prevention or violence reduction. It's an important, I'm not dismissing the important work of violence interruption and violence reduction. I'm not doing that. So anybody that does that work, just hear me out. I'm not doing that. But when we define what we want by the absence of what we don't want, that is not the same thing as creating what we dream about. So this means that the absence of illness doesn't constitute health. The absence of violence doesn't constitute peace. But what we've been conditioned to do is lock ourselves in a way to believe that justice is reducing the things that we don't want, rather than doing the hard work of imagining and building the things that we do. No one in this audience wants to live in a community or a neighborhood or send their kids to schools that are violence reduced neighborhood. We brought violence down by 10% in your neighborhood. You don't want to live in a neighborhood. You want to live in a neighborhood that has an abundance of peace, where there's a sense of belonging, where there's a sense of relationship, but we don't define what we want in those terms. And this is why in schools, sometimes schools define, it's a good school, we've reduced bullying by this much, right? Or we have fewer fights this year, as opposed to we have closer relationships. We have a higher sense of belonging. We have deeper relations, whatever that is. And so this notion that we define and we work to reduce the misery gets us in a constant and persistent way of work that becomes almost a cycle, right? It becomes a cycle that locks us in, and we cannot see outside of it. How many of you know what this is? Y'all, some of y'all probably too. You probably don't remember this. When I was a kid, we used to have to get quarters and go. Y'all remember that? All right, so in the next 30 seconds, I'm gonna see if y'all remember this. So we'll see, this is a test. If you know what this picture is, in the next 30 seconds, turn to your partner and name 2 of your favorite games. Go. All right, and stop. All right, by applause, Donkey Kong. By applause, Centipede. By applause, Pac-Man. By applause, Miss Pac-Man. All right, so y'all know what this is. So you remember there was a game in these arcades that was called Whack-A-Mole? You remember Whack-A-Mole? Whack-A-Mole, you have the thing, you boom, 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 boom. And you would actually never be able to hit them all down, right? This is what problem solving does to us, is that we're constantly in this mode of whack-a-mole-ness, right? And we're never able to see beyond the whack-a-mole game. And while it's important, we got problems, y'all, that we need to solve. I'm not suggesting that we should not be solving problems. But as leaders who deeply believe in justice, we have to be aware and conscious that if all we're doing is solving problems, we're not living into our full human potential to create that other possibility. And it takes work, y'all. It takes work, because I know that the problems before us are important. But part of our work, for those of us who are leaders, is also to do the hard work of dreaming. It's hard work to do the hard work of imagination, right? It's hard work. Dreaming is not for the faint, because one, it suggests that it ain't really work, right? Okay, I'm gonna. So I have another friend that I'm working with that we vibe on this. He sees justice leaders in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he's working in Los Angeles in this mode of persistent problem solving. And so he recognized that people just actually can't see, right? It's like in this country, you can't breathe, so you can't see it. And so his vision, what he is actually doing now, he shifted his work from sort of doing training and leadership. And now what he does is he takes people from South Central LA, from West and East Oakland, he takes them to South Africa for 2 weeks. Study truth and reconciliation, study healing. But his point is that, man, when people, they have to feel it. They have to see it. Now, it's not that South Africa is perfect, but he certainly understands the role of the truth and reconciliation process and what it did for the people in that space. So this notion of dreaming is difficult work. In my graduate program, the graduate students that I work with, I was explaining this concept. And what I realized is that they were oftentimes using to describe their work, these are social workers, organizers, teachers, that they were oftentimes using words in the confined category. And we can tell how easy it is about where we are in terms of possibility thinking or problem thinking, because it's enshrined in our language. So my graduate students would say things, my job is to defend the rights of parents, or my job is to disrupt the school-to-prison pipeline, or my job is to confront white supremacy in schools, whatever it is. All of that work is necessary. And so in their assignment, they came up with, like, this is easy. I asked them to write a one-page description of their job. And I saw this type of language, confined words, in their description. And so the following week after I read that, I said, now I want you to do it again. I want you to describe your jobs, but you can only use the words that are open. And they came back to me and they said, damn, that was the hardest assignment I've ever had. What do you mean, play? I can't, right? In other words, they couldn't think about the term reimagine. What does it mean to reimagine, right? So at the time, a lot of those students were focused on defund the police, which is again, an important body of work to address police, white supremacy in police departments and the culture of policing. Again, not saying we shouldn't be thinking about defund the police work. But what we're really saying is we're trying to reimagine public safety, right? And when we use the phrase and the terms, again, when we're trying to create something by using the terms, by the absence of it, we're not really creating anything. So they had a hard time thinking about and using the open words, but when they did, they understood the value of it. In my own work around trauma, I was working with a group of Black youth these were between the ages of, they were probably like 16 and 20. And I was using sort of this confined sort of language, and I was trained in trauma-informed approaches. And every Wednesday night at Laney Community College, this group of about 15 black boys or young men would sit in their plastic chairs, and I was using this sort of problem-driven way of, talking about their trauma, trying to understand how that trauma influenced their current behavior and why they need to make different choices. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So after this assignment with my students, I began to understand the power of sort of using this notion of imagination. During one of the groups Wednesday at Laney College, one of the young men named Marcus said, "Dr. G, I like coming here, and we talk about our problems, man, but I'm more than the worst thing that ever happened to me. I'm more than just my trauma. I want to talk about the fact that I want to open up my own T-shirt company." And then another young man chimed in. He said, "Yeah, man, I don't want to talk about that all the time, man. I want to talk about the fact that I want to open up my own auto body store." And they took the whole conversation, and they began to define their own healing through their dreams and imagination, through their possibility, through their assets. And I'm sitting back going, "Damn, what's going on here?" One of the young men's name was John. All of these young men had some form of trauma exposure. John was probably the most challenging because he was homeless, he was without shelter, he was substance abusing. He had been, there were young men that were looking for him and trying to do harm to him. He had a history of sexual violence and physical violence. He had a lot of stuff, right? And he would show up to our meetings high all the time. And so when it came to John said, "Man, this is cool, but Dr. G, I don't really want to open up. I don't want to open up a business, man. All I really want, man, is I want to be a firefighter. I want to be a firefighter in Oakland. I want a healthy family. I want kids and a wife, and I want to be a firefighter." And we all kind of was like, "Man, John, bruh." You know what I'm saying, right? Like, wow, bro, you need to, so. But we focused on the possibility, right? I gave those young men, the group ended after about a year, and I gave the young men my cell phone number, and we would stay in contact. They would send me a text every now and then. And this is probably about 8 years ago. I have to always add 2 years because of COVID, right? Probably about 8 years ago. And so from time to time, I get a text message from these young men. And I was actually in Chicago, y'all. This was right after, this was probably in 2021. There was the GEO conference. I was actually here, and I was doing a keynote address, and I got in the taxi, and I got a text message from John. "Dr. G, how you doing?" I said, "John, man, good to hear from you. It's really good to hear from you. How you doing?" And I get emotional every time I tell this story. I said, "How you doing?" in the text message. And the next text came back as this. That's John. Yeah, I get a little emotional, y'all, because I know what he went through. So John is a firefighter right now in Oakland with a beautiful family, right, with children. And it was because we leaned into that possibility, that we didn't focus on the brokenness and the problems that was facing his life. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm sitting up here crying and shit. I'm sorry, man. I'm just I'm telling y'all, I feel like I'm at home, so I'm just bear with me. So the power of possibility is real. It's just that we have to have the courage to lean into it. The final and fourth pivot is a pivot from hustle to flow. A pivot from hustle to flow. And this pivot it hits home for a lot of us, right? And this pivot means that sometimes we digest and we take in the toxicity of capitalist white supremacist culture. in small doses over time, so much so that we all develop an addiction to frenzy. An addiction to frenzy. What do I mean by an addiction to frenzy? An addiction to frenzy means that we feel that we're more valuable when we're so busy, right? We're doing stuff, right? So much so that we sometimes brag to each other. We kind of, we might say something like this. Rudy, I ain't seen you in a while, man. What you up to? Rudy might say, man, I'm so busy. I am the new director of this. I'm the new coach of my kids' team. I just took up guitar lessons, and I'm going back to school to get my whatever. And then I'm like, that ain't nothing, Rudy. Listen to what I'm doing. Y'all know what I'm talking about. That somehow when we talk about who we are as human beings, it's defined by our frenzy. Even when we know that it is not healthy for deep change, right? Even when we know it's not healthy for deeper change. Capitalist culture, white supremacist capitalist culture, has defined a human being by what a human being can earn or produce. And this is kind of what we've sort of taken small doses of that. For example, how many of you in this room right now have a to-do list? All right? So everybody didn't raise their hand. I know everybody. Who didn't raise their hand? You don't have Dana, you ain't got a to-do list? Your to-do list is in your hand right now. So you have a to-do list. What's the first thing you do when you accomplish something on your to-do list? You check it off, scratch it off, and you put 3 more things back on it. So there's this ongoingness, right, about filling our lives with tasks and engaging in things that sometimes may think fulfills us as human beings, but they're task-oriented. The second challenge with hustle and this addiction to frenzy is some new research, and it's profound research that I think is we don't understand enough about it. And it's a form of inequality that we don't know enough. We know about racial inequality and gender equality, class inequality. But what we don't know enough about is this new body of work out of Emory University called rest inequality, right? Oh, from here. She's doing some amazing, amazing work. That even our rest, there's inequality in the duration quality of our rest. And this addiction to frenzy in her work has shown that there's distinctions in the quality of our rest, because if you hear sirens sometimes, if you are worried about your bills being paid, if you got to work 2-3 jobs to put a roof over your head, all of these issues, these quality of life issues, has an impact on your capacity to rest. And in the book I talk about rest is just not slumber, right? Rest is peace of mind in some areas of your life. Not all, but peace of mind. And that is defined by however we choose to define it. And for those of you who have had, I don't want to call them sort of breakdowns, but you've had enough. If you've had enough, since you got me over here feeling like I'm in church, we're gonna pass the offering in a minute. Can I get an amen? No. When we've had enough, that the work, our family life, our relationships, that there's a toll on them that we hide as secrets, man. In my own work, I write about this. I had a full-time job in San Jose, which is about 40 miles from where I was completing my PhD at UC Berkeley. I was the executive director of an organization that I just started, and I had to raise about $500,000 a year. I just hired 4 new employees, and my son was just born. And I was feeling every minute of that. And one night, I woke up, and something was wrong, and then all of a sudden I just started sobbing. I mean, literally, I was sobbing. Put me to my knees. My wife and partner, she came out and she's like, "What's wrong with you?" And I was like, "I don't know," but I couldn't stop. And so part of my voice, right, my toxic masculinity was saying, "Get your ass up and take it." I'm being real. That's this part of my daddy was like, "You gotta tough through that." Part of my toxic masculinity was like, "Get your ass up and deal with it." But another voice was like, "Man, there's another way." And it was that voice, right, that, man, this is not sustainable for me, right, that I had enough. I had to it wasn't an intellectual shift, y'all. It was like, I can't do this. And that's sometimes, when we experience that, we don't want to tell nobody about it, right, because we got shame around it, right, or we have some embarrassment, or we don't want people to know that it makes us seem weak or something. And so that's not part of who we are. And so we don't talk about that part of what it means to be a leader trying to create justice. But we have to be aware of the consequences this has on our well-being. And so this pivot from hustle to flow means that we take intentional time, and I don't call it just self-care, right? Because self-care presumes that the responsibility of your well-being is yours, and it lets the damn institutions off the hook that create the stress in the first place. Okay. So what I'm suggesting is we need to be thinking about collective care. The policies and practices and institutions that create the space for well-being, as well as our practices that we need to take up to actually sustain ourselves. My own experience with, most recent experience with this shift from hustle to flow, I had thought I had it down, right? I thought I had, this idea down because of the breakdown that I had, and I found myself speaking around the country, and I had a well-oiled sort of routine. I would wake up at 5 in the morning, I would hop in the shower, I would get suited and booted, I would get in my car, and I'd get on an airplane, and I would say some stuff, and I would come back, and whoo, that was good work, right? And so one week, my wife was out of town, and I'm an empty nester. My kids is finally out the damn house, right? And I had to go do a speech, and so I was using my well-oiled routine, and I hopped into the shower, and I have a dog, right? And my dog was sitting by the door. I was in the shower, and I could see my dog sitting by the door. You know how the dog looks at you when they got to go pee? This is gonna be a little graphic, but I don't care. I'm gonna tell y'all anyway. The dog was looking at me like she got to go pee. So I was like, damn, I'm in the shower. I gotta go let the dog out. And it's 5 in the morning, so I get out of the shower. If you out of the shower, you butt naked and wet. So I told you it's gonna be a little graphic. So I hop out of the shower, and I slip, and I go airborne, and I fall down on my ribs. Bam, the corner. I have a corner step up to my bathroom. And I was like, oh, damn. Now, my dog ain't Lassie, so this is how my dog was looking. My dog looked at me like this, like, what's the problem, bro? I gotta get out here and take a piss. So I tried to get up, and I was thinking like, man, I gotta get up. I got a flight to catch. I gotta let this dog out. And my rib said, sit your ass down. And I couldn't move. I literally couldn't move. And my dog was looking at me. I was looking at the dog. I couldn't move, so I had to crawl over to the side of my bed. And the first person I've called, of course, at 5:30 in the morning now, because I was laying out there for a while, was my wife. And first thing she said is, what's wrong, right? And I said, I can't move. She called the ambulance. The ambulance came and got me, took me to the hospital, and they realized I had 3 broken ribs and a fractured vertebrae. Now, listen to this when this happened. This happened on March 14th, 2020. The doctor told me, you ain't gonna be speaking nowhere because your ribs are broken. Oh, damn, I can't speak. What do you mean I can't speak? I'm gonna be laid up for, up to 10 weeks, man. He said, yeah, you're gonna be laid up. So I get home and realize that y'all joined me. Right? Nobody was going anywhere. And what the universe was telling us is, this is some flow. Sit your butt down. It made us conscious of our frenzy. Because what we did is we were forced to reckon with time and how we use it. Even if time was used on Zoom, we were conscious, right? We had the time to think differently about time and how we use it. And so this last pivot from hustle to flow is a call to us in our own leadership, is to think about setting more realistic timelines for ourselves, understanding that no 5-year strategic plan is going to solve issues of structural racism that took 400 years to build in 2 years. So for those of you who are funders, right, we're not going to end racial violence, in a year with a $100,000 grant. All right, sorry about that, Rudy. I'm calling you out, brother. But we need to begin to understand that much of the work that we take is going to take greater, deeper time and us engaging in flow. A friend of mine said, I'll end with this quote. He said that his first time he went to Europe, he saw these fantastic cathedrals that were built. And the guide was explaining to him that, these cathedrals took 10,000, some 5,000 years to actually build these cathedrals. These weren't built in a year or two. These took years to build. And my friend said, man, that meant the person that began laying the bricks knew that they would never see the beauty and grandeur of what they were building. But they had the commitment to what they built, and each brick that they laid was transformative, and that one day we're going to be a cathedral. And he said, what kind of thinking does that take? And I think that we need more of that cathedral thinking in our work. And that while the issues that we have are urgent and that we need to respond to them, that we also need to hold this notion of cathedral building at the same time. And that we go in and day out and lay the bricks that are necessary to ultimately have a deep transformation in our society. I want to leave with giving y'all a 30-day challenge, which is just to use one of these pivots: a mirror, possibility, transformative relationships, and flow. Just use one for the next 30 days in your own leadership. And using that, I believe, and my vision is that when we begin to promote a more deeper transformative way of healing, that ultimately we'll begin to create the justice and the societies that we want. Thank you so much, y'all. Thank y'all. Thank y'all. We got Q&A. Okay. Thank y'all.
Thank you so much for your lecture tonight. As you talk about cathedral thinking, right? How do you, it's hard for people who are out in the community working and pulling together these structures to explain to the people who come to the table. Everybody always has expectation. We're going to change the world this week. No, this is going to take some time, and it may not even be in our lifetime. How do you help or encourage people in that conversation? What language do we use in those conversations to get people to realize this isn't, we're at the table today, but this is going to be something that wasn't invented in a day, and so,
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for those of us as leaders, I think we default to the urgency. And I think that's important because there are so many urgent problems to solve. Like when the schools shut down and, for COVID, we couldn't build a cathedral to think about how to educate kids in this country. We had to respond. And so I think what's important for leaders is to understand the distinction and the difference between what is urgent and needs to be done now and what is the cathedral. Because most of us think about our own leadership as only consistent, persistent whack-a-mole, right? And so what is your legacy? What are you trying to create what do you want people to say about you when you're not here no more? What is your contribution? That's legacy, right? That's cathedral building, right? And so what I'm trying to, how I'm trying to respond to the question is that as leaders, we have to be intentional and cognizant and reminding ourselves of what is the thing that I'm doing that's in front of me that must be done, and what is the cathedral that I'm trying to build. And again, to be able to use both. My call is to really push us as leaders, right? Is to really, because yeah, it's more work. Yes, it's harder now I got to think of a cathedral, but you are a leader. And so you have that responsibility now, right? Is to be able to do both. Great question.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much.
Tell me your name.
I'm Leslie.
Hi, Leslie. And Robert. Thanks, Robert.
Hi, everybody. This is awesome. So I personally have moving from hustle to flow. And I'm recognizing that there's so much grief in that process. True grief, right? Going from the highest positions, executive levels, financial stability, all of those things to something completely different. I'm grieving, walking away from all of that to something that I know is truer, more essence, all of that, right? So I just am curious if you or anyone else who you know is in that process, what do you do with the grief? How do you sit with it?
Well, one, I think it's important that, and thank you for that question. One, I think it's important that you are aware that this is a grieving process, which is I'm letting that Leslie go. That Leslie did what she was supposed to do, and so that's grieving is a important and natural process of letting go. What I would encourage is to ask Leslie, and for Leslie to continue to wrestle with this question, which is, who is Leslie becoming? And who does Leslie want to be? That's a different question, because that old Leslie, the one that was defined by the kind of status and role and all the wrappings that come with that, but that probably was withering away or chipping away at your soul at the same time, right? So now that question is, who do I want to be? Who do I want to become? And clarity, not just vague, like I just want to be comfortable. No, really clear about what that feels like and what that means to you, right? Great question.
It is a perfect transition to shift to the flow part of the evening. And we're going to invite you to have a snack or a glass of wine, to get a book signed. Shawn, you're going to stay around for a few minutes
Absolutely.
and sign some books. Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, everybody.